to the J3U podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett, and with me is co-host Luke Miller. And today, depending on when you're listening to this, I've already done the New York Pro, which is in Tampa. I know that's confusing. It's not the Tampa Pro. So today was going to be kind of like the show day and just this initial post-show just review and kind of diving into my experiences throughout the weekend and giving you also some insights throughout that timeline. So Luke, what's up, man? How's it going?
Not much, man. Just ticking my boxes over here, moving along with my prep too. Excited to see the final package there. But I'm really excited to hear what you think about the differences between Indy and New York and what that looked like comparatively. Because I know after Indy, you had a day of eating and then hit a new low afterwards. So I just kind of wanted to hear the differences between Indy and New York, and if there was anything you think you could have done different, because New York was even better than Indy, based on the pictures I saw.
Yeah, it was better. So it's like to go back and be like, oh, I would have done this to be even better. It's like, well, shit, you got better. So I guess it wouldn't really change much. I mean, off how I wanted to come into Indy was definitely like a personal redemption for the Olympia, because I was just off at Olympia. I was soft. It had body fat on me. I was flat. Tan sucked. It was like all around just I still got 13th, which still 13th in the world, I guess, but it still wasn't up to my own personal standards. So going into Indy, I'm like, well, those things that I really sucked at in Olympia, I want to make sure I really show that I'm at the high level that I truly am. So conditioning was like top of the list. So I definitely, once I saw that the hardest look I had, that's what I want to come to stage. And I definitely make a sacrifice bringing that look in fullness. And I see it a lot in my front double. The chest kind of flattens out. In my side chest, I don't have as much roundness in the chest. Legs hold well. Back, I'll start seeing a little bit in the traps, but I think overall, seem like delts and lats and everything, those hold on pretty good. But those weaker body parts that I struggle with are the ones that take a little bit of a sacrifice. And you're going out there, you don't know who you're going to stand against, right? So you might be that guy that's super hard, but everyone else is really full and round, and you're like, oh shit. So you get kind of out muscled in a lot of shots, and that stands out on them more. I definitely was the hardest guy in the 212s, but the winner, Tony, he had crazy round muscle belly. He was very full. Nathan was also, excellent all around, had a little bit more fullness up top, but I definitely probably beat him on the bottom end. Yeah. Except for Tony's side shot. His side shot looks like Kai Green, like his like the way it stands out to me. But from the back, like hams, glutes, they were like, just looked like I got clawed by like a bear, which is cool. That's what I wanted. And I was okay with that. I was okay walking on stage, and people were like thoroughly impressed, with that level of conditioning, which, whatever, people's champion.
Well, New York, you were definitely a lot fuller for New York. And I know you were worried about like the backside kind of going away, and like the glute lines and stuff, but it didn't really seem to affect it.
Yeah. So coming off Indy, of course, they're like, well, let's go eat, and try to be reserved as I could. But the next day, after the show, just to mitigate some of that, because we went out and we had like 3 sushi rolls, which are sushi rolls that were like mayo and, shrimp tempura, like just what, the stuff you want on them. And then we walked to Whole Foods and we got a bunch of crap there to buy, like for desserts, and just sat in bed and just ate a bunch. So definitely the next day, like my hands were tight, and like you could tell like the sodium was going to be creeping up, because you come from a state where you're somewhat fluid restricted, because in Indy I still restrict fluids day of the show, and just to hold the body weight that I want. And then you're going to, instead of eating a bunch of more like high sodium, high carb meals, then the next day you're like, oh, cool, I'm still good. It's like, then you're drinking fluids and like all the swelling's happening, right? And you're adapting, And so to mitigate that, keep fluids high, but went down to just protein veggies. And by the next day, I had already hit like a new body weight low and pulled all that water off. And so I was like, okay, I'm 5 days out now. I'm good. uh, but I was still able to like bring my food back up to like close to a maintenance level and actually feed even more going into New York.
Yeah.
And so thinking about like, well, it's pretty much the same Indy lineup that's coming to New York. These guys are fuller, so I should come in a little fuller and it'd be okay to sacrifice some off the back end.
Yeah.
You know, and it was some things to consider were like the show was like an hour earlier than Indy, so I wasn't going to be getting as much food fluid in, but I could account for this. And you know, weight wise, I think on Indy, you know, I'm not carrying my scale around everywhere with me, and for taking a lot with me though. I was probably about like 205, close to it, going on stage. For New York, I was right at probably a little just touch over 206. So not much difference. Because I would see throughout the day, like 207 looked pretty good. It really did. Once I got past that though, I wasn't willing to like sacrifice the condition that was lost on the back, which, you know, we trained out there with Joe Bennett at his gym.
Yeah.
Which is really nice of him. It's a badass gym. It's actually Dave Bautista's like personal gym.
Yeah.
And it's like hand selected equipment. Just Joe like matches all the profiles and straight curves excellent, you know. So that was cool. But Joe was like, you know, I was like 208 posing in the gym when we took those pics with him. He's like, dude, you can walk on stage like this and you're still like, he's like, your perception of what conditioned is, like, I think is already skewed because this is still super conditioned in stage lean. And it's like, it is, but like the little bit of detail that does fade, like, oh man, I just couldn't leave it.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't just let that go. So I was a little fuller for New York, but arguably I still could have been fuller. But everyone says that, like, oh, I could have been fuller until you're like softer, right? And how much fullness do I gain versus condition loss versus who I'm standing next to? Oh, those are tough. Those are the tough calls to really make. Yeah. And you don't really know till you're out there. And you see the pics afterwards, you're like, oh.
Okay. Gamble. But after New York, like I saw you change your split up a little bit. What's kind of the thoughts after seeing some of the pictures?
Yeah. Well, I think one interesting thing I wanted to hit was kind of what I did do different to like wake up fuller.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you saw those pics the show day that I posted, and I went in those gym lighting, like, oh man, it was like I'm on. Like it's you know when you wake up and you're like, yes, you nailed it. Like it's such an exciting feeling. Like I was so pumped, because I was weighing myself at night and in the morning and realizing how much weight I was dropping, and I would always drop down to this 203.6 or 204. Show day I hit 204.0 for like I hit 3 days in a row, and that was going to bed. I want to say I had to look back, maybe 209, 210, but on one day out I was 208. So I knew like, oh shit, either I'm going to hit a new low or I'll be about the same because I'm not going to sleep as long. I'm waking up early for show day.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I was like, okay, I need to do something so I don't have as big of a drop overnight. So when I woke up to pee mid sleep is when I had like an extra meal and something to, for one, add some carbs back in, add some fats, but then have some fluids. And I didn't do any protein. It was just like 110 grams of rice, 15 grams of peanut butter, some salt, and then I had like 8 ounces of water.
Yeah.
I still dropped another 2 pounds after I had that because I woke up and I was 207.2, and then I dropped to 205.2 when I actually did wake up. 207 looked pretty fucking gnarly. I was like, I really like this. But then when I woke up, I was super hard. I'm like, oh yeah. It's like, man, conditioning's so cool. It's hard, you know, it's hard to like, yeah, I'm full, but everyone can be full. But anyway, that was a strategy that I used to eat a little bit so I wouldn't drop as much to that flat state. Then it's a lot easier to like kind of maintain that instead of trying to build back up with it with only so much time left. So from there I had my first meal, some fluids, and that brought me up to around that 206, little over 206 mark. From that point on, it was just maintaining it. So I had like another small snack. My first meal was like 100 grams of carbs. Then I had like 50 grams of carbs about an hour before going out with a little bit of fluid too. And that was enough to float me around that look.
Were those weight drops with diuretic usage at all or no?
No diuretics. So I didn't use any at all for the entire show. Like, I mean, for how hard I wake up, I'm hard and flat, so it's,
yeah, no, for sure. So it's worse, which is why I asked the question, right? It's like people think that this diuretic, whether it's quarter tab, half tab, whole tab, whatever these people choose to use, is like a mandatory thing to utilize within a peak, right? Like they think it's that last like 0.1%. And it's like, if you're already waking up struggling to hang on to fullness because you're so lean, like it's not overly necessary. It's just manipulating sodium, water, and food in order to get the desired look, right? And you're probably running the risk of ruining the look before you're actually going to improve it when that is the situation.
Yeah, no, you're pulling that point out. It's a great point too, because I don't know if people think taking that diuretic works to only pull extracellular and not intracellular. It's going to hold water in the muscle and just pull this film off you. But it's working the same way as if you weren't drinking water. So like this water drop you have overnight, you're pulling extra and intracellular. If you took a diuretic, it's going to do the same thing, So if you happen to wake up and you're like, I'm still super watery every morning I wake up. Well, maybe you do need to push out more fluids and a diuretic might make sense. I don't think that's what I would do.
One of the things to pull out is you had tracked the exact weight drop across the week without diuretic usage, right? Yeah. So coming in, like one of the things I'll always do is you typically have a pretty good idea if someone's going to want it type of a thing, or need to use it, is look at the weight drop relative to no diuretic usage and diuretic usage a little bit out from show day, so that you can make that judgment call when it does come to show day, because you have a general trend line of what the change in weight is between the two, and change in look as well.
Yeah, because it's so often you have people that just add it in and then it just ruins the look. And then they're manipulating other variables too. So yeah, that especially coaching myself, it takes a lot of stress off of being more predictive, and that's what I want going into the show. So I already pretty much know where I want to land, and know I'm pretty close to predicting how I will wake up, because I've been doing it every morning before leading up. Like I decided just to train every day, which I don't do. I usually take the day before the show off. I still went and trained just to nothing taxing, but so I could keep such consistent variables in place where I had the same output. Huh?
You just do like a pump up session?
Pretty much. Like kind of like maybe something I would do before I would pump up and go out on stage.
Yeah.
And I tried to keep it around the same, like, hey, have a meal and then go train just like I would on show day, to try to, and then weigh myself around there and see how I looked. So for show day, it's like, well, I pretty much already have my show day plan. It just might need some little bit of tweaking. And then I already know about my fluids, like roughly what I would need, and to wake up and have that nailed. Now, maintaining the look, and I know I've talked a lot before, and like, don't manipulate your water like days out, keep it high. But the day of the show, I think is a time when you need to control fluids to control the look, because if
talk morning to show then, so that you can kind of the talk morning to night show then on holding that look.
Yeah. So like waking up at 2:05 and going on stage at 2:06, like that's not a lot of food and fluid that's needed to bring my body weight up. Like from when I woke up at 5 a.m. to getting on stage at 8:30, I had like about half a gallon of fluid, which is actually a pretty good amount. But for that whole day, it was roughly a little less than a gallon all the way to finals, considering I normally have 2.25 gallons. So the fluid was reduced. But these short-term manipulations, you're not going to see the feedback and the fight against your body trying to maintain homeostasis yet. Yeah. So if it was like a 2-day show, I think this would definitely change. But what I'm doing, like, so like post stage, I know like, well, I have hours before I go back to finals after prejudging.
Yeah.
I weigh myself again, and there's weight drop because I was on stage sweating, putting out output. So I'll have like fluids immediately, a good amount, like 16 ounces, not a good amount, 16 ounces. Then I'll eat when I'm hungry with some fluids for the meal. And usually I usually do 6 to 8 ounces of fluid, just enough that I need to get the meal down. Not drinking like you're on prep and you need, like, you're trying to get, to kill hunger. Like, I'm going to drink 30 ounces of water with a meal. Like, that's ridiculous, Then I'll weigh myself, and just kind of repeating that process. And, for, if you're not seeing body weight go up and you're eating a carbohydrate amount that in those previous days that has been bringing your weight up and getting fuller, that should be a note that you're not getting enough fluid. Because if the carb amount's checked off, that box is checked. The day prior, that gets you full and brings your body weight up. But it's not. It's because you don't have enough fluid to uptake the glycogen. And that's when you should be bringing in more fluids. And so that's kind of how the marker that I use. Now, if weight is going down, well, are you still consuming enough carbohydrate? You probably need to increase it, but there should also probably be a proportionate increase of fluids, because there's a proportionate increase of carbohydrate along with that amount. Yeah. And that's kind of how I go about it. If weight's dropping, well, I can do a little bit more food and fluids. If weight's going up too high, well, then you could bring down fluids some. And carbohydrates has probably come along too. So that's how I moderate all the way into finals. And the judging, they're like, everyone came back a little fuller to finals. That's like one of the judges told me. And I was a little fuller finals, and like Renee was like, I think you look better at finals. Like, yeah, okay. Maybe I did. I wasn't too much fuller. I'd have to look back, but maybe it was still a little over 206. I don't think I got close to 207 or anything.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's like you don't see people taking the time to find where that best look is relative to body weight, and then making the decisions off of fluid and carbohydrate consumption based on that. Like monitoring the change in body weight according to what we're doing with fluid and nutrition that you just walked us through. But I think it's something that should be, right? Because by the time you get to peak week, minus the prep that just like is way behind schedule, you're really just trying to find that best look throughout Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then keep that person with the variables trending around that best look so that you can land the plane on Saturday morning.
Right.
And people think that this peak week stuff is like, oh, I have to carb load, or I have to do this, or I should see this happen. And it's like, you gotta play with the cards that are dealt. And if you're trying to create something out of a deck of cards that's not even present, like why are you doing that? And what makes you think that you can do that, right? And that is something that has changed the way that I peak clients in the past like 6 to 12 months, is like, okay, this is where we're at. Let's find the best look, whether this is a slightly fuller look or a little bit of a drier look or whatever that may be. And then just doing the variables according to that. And it's interesting how much less manipulation you need when you approach it that way.
Yeah, it's not as sexy of a sell, It's like, oh, this is it. It's like, yeah. And it's like, it might be like, well, I'm going to find the coach that wants to like really do all this crazy stuff because they sound like they're a mad scientist. But yeah, you have a lot moving. Like if you never had the look to begin with, and then you're going to make these manipulations to all of a sudden get that look, you're probably just going to fuck yourself up to where you don't even hit the mark at all.
Yeah.
I think there's application to the different peaking strategies, but I definitely think the least risk and most predictive is bringing food up, ideally like a few weeks out, if you have that luxury, and just monitoring it daily and adjusting, if you need a little bit more, if you need a little bit less. You should be fairly full, but still waking up hard. And then you can pretty much walk out on stage like that. Now I think there's approaches to like front loading and back loading carbs, but throughout peak week, your look and scale weight and everything's going to be all over the place, and it makes it hard to really have a clear marker of like what's going on. You know, if someone had needed all that time for fat loss, right? They're just not ready. Well, the thing about it is going into peak week, you're not going to do something magical to get yourself ready. That's the unfortunate thing. But there is a few things that you would like want to rapidly drop off fatigue if you had to push that hard to the end.
Yep.
So potentially maybe like, hey, we got right to show week. We're ready. Like, oh, fuck, we barely made it. But like they look super watery. Fatigue's very high. We could do the front load like a Monday, Tuesday, really high carb amount. They're rapidly drop off, you know, that fatigue, get glycogen loaded. Then you have the days into peak week where you could like now have them drop some water from maybe they spilled a little bit, but also their, you know, cortisol's dropping. And then by Friday, maybe it's just a lesser of a bump, right, of food, or you just kind of maintain them throughout. Or the rapid backload where you just like, you need it every bit to like keep pulling body fat off, or maybe there's a weight restriction, right? And they have to make weight. And then you just have to give them food at the very end. And I could see the rationale there too, because I've had to do that where I can't eat into the show because I have to make weight. And then you just have some carb bump in the end. But again, those are less predictive of like how I would do the approach. So, and you had brought up about diuretics because, at least the biggest thing that you're going to manipulate is carbs, right? For getting the look you want, and how much fluid you need around that carb amount. But there's still, I think, is some application if you're like enhanced bodybuilding. We can use diuretics. I think there's still some application there. I most times I don't use them now going into the show. If anything, I think it had more application for making sure you hold that look and that peak look. Because once you start reducing fluids, at some point you're going to have some regulatory where aldosterone will increase. You'll start retaining fluids and you'll stop urinating. And then any fluids that you do take in with the carbohydrate amount, you will retain. And that's when I could see the application for a diuretic where you need to excrete sodium, and that's how they work, called sodium excretion. However, you also don't want to stop drinking fluids, because if you do both, then you get really, really flat, even worse. So you want something that can push out sodium, but you keep drinking those fluids to keep that balance of excretion happening. So you can still move around that peak mark. So let's say this was like, I went on stage at like 8 a.m. and I wasn't going on stage again until like 8 p.m. And I'm noticing this happening. Like peeing is slowing down. The scale weight's going up. I'm now having to get more restrictive on fluids and I'm not getting that fullness. It's like, oh shit, well, maybe I should add in a diuretic at this point so I can keep this look, keep urinating, pushing fluids out. I think this has the application for the 2-day show as well. When you had to peak at prejudging in the morning and you're not going on again, because I've done this for the Dallas Europa. You go on in the morning and you don't go on again to the next day at like 4 p.m. It's like, that's a long time for me to do this process of like trying to tightly manipulate. I just, when I do that show, I rapidly increased fluids quite a bit. By the night, I was like 219. Now I weighed in like 212 for this show. So I came up a lot, super full, but a little watery, you know?
Yeah.
And that's when at that night, I took, you know, a little bit of diazide and had that same type of water drop to get back to that look that I wanted to hold. And so I think that's when I've used the application, you know, for someone that's natural, that can get a bit trickier. And I think you might be better off being less restrictive in your fluid approach. Just depends. It depends on the timing and everything and that individual's response. So you have some people that can hold that look for a long time, or man, if you manipulate things too much, they'll hold like crazy. They're really responsive to sodium. I think that's the client. You'll notice that though, going into the show. Like if you give them a refeed day and their condiments bump or something like that, or or they even have a cheat meal, they're like a fluid buffalo the next day. Like, yeah, you're that sodium retainer,
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, that was a lot of the show day stuff. I know you had asked about like what now a long
Yeah.
time
So
ago.
like,
I think you asked that.
yeah, I saw you had made some changes to training. So I think people would like to hear like your thoughts on why you're making the changes and maybe what that looks like for aligning the visuals according to the application.
Yeah, so what I had been running all the way through the show was uh, push, pull, delt arms, legs, and have an off day and repeat.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, all those muscle groups were getting hit every 5 days. Initially, I had started this even earlier in prep doing pull, push, yeah, pull, push, off, legs, off. So I had this extra off day in there, but my sessions were getting long, and by the end of that session on my push and pull days, it was just like just going through motions, and fatigue was higher. So it's like, well, let me take that accessory work, delt arms, and I'll put it on that off day. And then I can train more, I get more food on those days, and it was just overall less taxing.
Yep.
But now, since I got on stage, I looked at picks and kind of where I need to make improvements, where I don't need to make improvements. Clearly the areas that go flat are chest, and then I could arguably say some trap area.
Yep.
I've had arguably like I am fairly complete. So like if you had to like, hey, let's add 6 pounds of stage weight on me, you could put like all on back and you'd be like, yeah, like you're never going to be like, oh, his back is way too big. Like this is ridiculous. Unless you just like didn't train legs at all. And you're like, yeah, you need some, you would tell them you need to build your legs, not to bring down your back though. That would be the feedback, right? So looking at that, I was like, okay, I need to prioritize where I can, and coming off here, whether it's off season or prepping for a show, I can still make some improvements. I can, and being an enhanced bodybuilder, you can. So, where are my strengths? So right away, like legs, hamstrings, quads, like those are strong points to me. All the shots on stage are strong. Delts are within reason. Yeah, I mean, you get to one of those areas you probably couldn't have big enough, but they're within reason. Arms were within reason too, but definitely chest, and then I would say back from there. So, So split design, deprioritize your strengths. So legs was going to go knock down to once a week, every 7 days, instead of getting trained every 5 days with the same volume. So in other words, there's a volume drop still because the frequency is more spread out. So it's very, very much a maintenance volume. So I can have more resources to put towards my weak body parts. Delta arm day. It's fun as hell. Don't get me wrong. You pump delta arms, like, yeah, man, delta arm day. but those are priority days for me. Like that's another day I could either fully rest, or I could have the more frequency for chest and back. So pull delta arm day. So what do I need? Well, I'm going to do push and pull twice a week now. So that frequency goes from every 5 days to every 3 days. But I'm starting with the volume level that I do for the whole entire week. Yep. So what I don't want to do is like go from doing, say, 8 sets of chest in a session every 5 days to doing 8 sets of chest in a session every 3 days. That's a tremendous volume increase that I'm not ready for because I'm just coming off my show. So I need kind of this like introductory period where I'm going to take, say, I was doing 8 sets every 5 days, and now I'm maybe going to do 6 sets every 3 days. But for total average for the week, the volume comes out to be the same. And also like quality is going to improve too, because I won't have this longer session. Yeah. Even though my sessions are already pretty short. But so that's at least the thought process in that split design would be, it was pull, push, off, pull, push, legs, off. Another area was glutes that I still think could be improved slightly. So on one of the pull days is when I could put I'm going to put my hip hinge work. I'm still like really debating on that. And I don't want to do an RDL. I'll probably do that hack good morning, but but make it to where it's not as this intensive lift. Like, cause I've done RDLs on back day before, like as just a ham back day. And man, that one it's so draining and it takes away from the pull session. So I don't want that either. But I think I'll put it at the end of the session, do like a ham curl first. And then the hack good morning is definitely like super deliberate and precise in how I do it. So like slow eccentric, pause in the bottom, come up. It's not like this power movement. And I might even make sure I keep it at like that one RIR to where I'm not taking it like to death, right? So I can moderate the effort level there. And then on my leg day, I would still have like the other ham curl. And then it'd be more quad focused, right?
And that gives you the opportunity to gauge recovery response with that initial introduction, and then you could always move it. Move out RIR if needed or whatever.
Sure. No, truly, like I lay out a plan. You probably do the same. You lay out a plan, and then as you're like going through what you've laid out, you're kind of working it through. Because I've done a movement and be like, all right, this feels good. What makes sense next? It's like, oh, that one I planned, that I don't know, that's not going to flow right, and then I change it. For the most part, by now it's like I got it pretty on, and I can get stubborn with what I plan out. But you can kind of move through your workout and know if it's a good flow or not, and make some additions. So you can't be like too stuck to what you're doing, or I'll even know volume wise, because I might be going through some sets and be like, oh, I did my second set, and I just feel like I'm getting some stimulus now. Like it now feels good. This is more so on back for me. So I might need like I was like, oh, I'm going to do a third set, and then I'll be like, all right, that was a good volume level. But I've gotten to the point where I'm mature enough to know when to do that and when not to do it. Cause I've wanted to leave everything on the table for every rep of every set. And I couldn't program like that how I do now.
I think where that utility comes in is like weeks 2 through 4 of a new setup. Like week 1, I'm pretty strict about, okay, we need to work through these sessions and see like what the damage is / how you feel at the end of the week. Week 2, maybe start to be like, okay, let's try a small addition here, or small change here. And then week 3, week 4, we're kind of finalizing the changes to what it's going to be for a while. Minus obviously the auto-regulatory volume manipulations. But I think when you're trying to learn that process of being able to do that, being strict earlier on and gathering data first will help you build that as well, because that capacity to be able to kind of go into a session and make changes as needed.
It's a unique situation right now because I'm a 1 week post show. So essentially coming off kind of a deload, but almost not a deload because it's still kind of fatiguing being at a show, and especially dropping fluids down somewhat, and my travel was fucking stupid. I was so delayed and had to stay an extra day. It's nothing like waking up at 4 a.m. on 4 hours of sleep and you're like, oh, my flight's delayed 4 hours. You're like, and I can't go back to sleep though. So,
well, what do I do now?
But, anyway, like, so my plan now is I'm going to do another show. I'm going to do the Puerto Rico Pro, which is in the Bahamas. And that will now be, when we're talking today, is 5 weeks. So, the thought process of like, well, should you be changing your training split right now? And
creeps in.
Yeah, are you like, well, how are you going to even improve? And basically coming off this show, well, for one, I've been conditioned, and I had 6 weeks, so I brought food up, which is I think the biggest driver post show for what you can do. Maybe you're just regaining, you're regaining glycogen, but I think you can still improve. Like guys still improve going into these shows, and I want good stimulus frequent for the body parts I need, and the body parts I don't. Well, I can manage fatigue well, and not train as much. And it might get back to where I'm 3 weeks out, like in the next 2 weeks, and I need to pull back some. But I think overall the plan design should still be in place. If it's a design that's going to improve my weaknesses. It's probably a design that's going to do well for holding tissue, but just volume catered to my recovery ability.
Yep.
And I've done this split before. Like, this isn't a new split. It's usually always chest and back. So this is probably I think once you get to this level and you're developed and you have these weak body parts, you're probably going to be in a specialized split probably forever. I can see that guys rotate and they bring a body part up and they go back to like an overall balanced training plan. But by this point where it's so specific where my weight has to be, and I can only have so much tissue added, that it's likely just going to be, this is my forever split up somewhat. But so I'll carry this out into the show, and this will probably be what I would carry out throughout off season, or hopefully into an Olympia prep. But
you letting your weight come up between those 6 weeks?
Yeah, so I pull down really fast, especially off this lapse prep, and that's why I was ready so far ahead. And I was ready ahead, even having like cheat meals and stuff too. Yeah. Which so I realized that. So what's cool is I can look back at all my data and where my body weight was, where my like caliper sites were, and be like, all right, this moment I have maybe about this much time to pull back down. So like this morning I was 208.2. So I'm up 4 pounds. But so this is tough because honestly, this is a mind fuck for me. Seeing that 208, it makes you want to make decisions you probably shouldn't be. Because I got in my head a little bit about it with the weight, just seeing the weight. I'm like, oh man, I have to be like, hold too much body fat now, or why am I holding water? Or like, it's like, where is this weight at? Like, will I have enough time? That's because that's been such a fear from Olympians not being ready. So I have to like step away and just be as objective as I can. And Renee actually has a really good eye. She'll look at me and be like, you're still like really crispy hard. I'm like, okay. And she won't bullshit me, but there's a few factors that go into it that I have to consider. So coming from that show week where I'm reducing like residual fibers and carbs, like down to like rice and no veggies and limited fiber sources, I'm now coming to a point where I'm like, I introduce like my oats back and pumpkin and more veggies. So there's like, when I wake up, I'm like, I feel my GI is heavier. Like I can feel it. Not waking up like waist sucked down to belly button to spine, So I'm like, okay, there's GI weight there. Like food volume's up. That's going to be a thing. Also, I reintroduced the injectables as well. Yeah. And pulled orals, and I also pulled out my AI. So there's probably going to be a little bit more, for one, just fullness, but in water retention there. Sure. And I did that just from a health aspect. I'm fine off season, just letting estrogen rise until there's like an issue basically. But I definitely like for coming to stage, like I saw a huge benefit from adding an AI in at a high amount to just run estrogen low. And I got really hard doing it, but for right now I don't need that. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to accept having a little bit of water on me. And it's not much. It really isn't. Like, again, it's me being hypercritical of like, are the 20 glute lines there, or is it just the 15,
Yeah, I mean, objectively, right? Like not only from the health parameter consideration, but like looking to improve within those 6 weeks, like the reintroduction of injectables, pulling the AI, letting estradiol rise, like that's going to only be beneficial from a recovery capacity standpoint and everything as well. So you have to support the goal at the moment, and that goal at the moment is doing what you need to get better within those 6 weeks as much as possible. And you can always introduce to manipulate those factors because it's no longer fighting a timeline. It's more like what has to happen now in order to lead you to a slightly improved spot from Indy/New York. And it's on such a short time scale relative to what we typically discuss, right? But it's not something to be afraid of. And then it's a good point to make for people who maybe miss their pro card at one show and have to go to another, or are bridging between those shows, that like you do have to sometimes pull back for long-term health maintenance and supporting the goal of the current time, even if it's just between shows. You can't hold that crispy look.
Yeah.
8, 9, 10 weeks. And I think that when you try to do that is when these people end up showing worse at the second or third show.
Yeah, you keep fading. It's hard to hold that, because I like even pull down like some of the things that like I'm like trying to rationalize, like each compound, like say Trenbolone. Trenbolone's great for blunting glucocorticoid receptor and cortisol release. So it's like, well, if food's going up. I also removed clenbuterol, so I mean that's out of place. So it's like I have other things now that are supportive of muscle retention. So it's like, okay, well, I probably don't need this compound as high that is supportive of preventing muscle loss, right?
Yeah.
So it's like there's like justifications like that to make within that planning. But you make a great point. Like, how many weeks post show, like, should you be controlling things? And I think like an ideal, like if you have a show that's within 3 weeks after a show, I think you can almost run that straight through without trying to bring body weight up or lose allowing some conditioning to be lost. But beyond that, like if it's longer than 3 to 4 weeks, you need to make those adjustments if you were in shape. And so like for me, this will be like a little 2-week phase with compounds adjusted, my step counts down, like clenbuterol's out. Then I'll have 4 weeks where I'll pretty much go back to what I was doing, close to it. What I realized this past one is that, man, adding the orals in at the end just wasn't this huge, big player, like I in Indy, I was using like halotestin. I used a little bit more halo for New York, and it's like, I didn't really see this vast difference, and it's only more strain, oxidative stress. And it's like, I don't even think I need a oral. I mean, there's, don't get me wrong, there's a place for them, but at least for what I want to do, like health wise, and still bringing a great look, I don't think I do. Now, I do have like ideas that I just like to test out and see. Right. So I've rotated like one oral at a time to kind of see, like, because going into Indy, I'm getting way off track here, but I don't know if people want to listen. Like I had like strength kind of dipped, and I had added in some Anavar, and it's like, oh, like I noticed this, like I have a good performance improvement. And then I swapped to Halo once I got close to Indy, and it's like I couldn't tell a real difference. And honestly, I think I liked the Anavar better from the training aspect. But I've played around the idea of like, well, I've used Winstrol a lot, and I just don't. It's like the same thing, and yeah. I've had like so much enough compounds in place to where it just doesn't matter at that point. Yeah. Superdraw has my interest. I've used it a long time ago, but again, it's like, what am I trying to get out of that? It's like, is it fullness? Well, what does fullness bring? Water. So, or the same guy's using Anadrol in peak week, right? And well, how do you get the fullness? What's what makes you retain water, right? So you're going to retain some outside the muscle too, a little bit.
Acute angiotensin response to.
Yeah, exactly. And driving up aldosterone, and so you're making some sacrifices there. So I don't know. That's at least that's what my considerations are going to Bahamas. Like I think 4 weeks out, I'll bring like my normal injectables, and they're all fast acting now. I usually use like Test Sip throughout, but to like have a quick reintroduction, I switched to Test Prop. Like that was one thing that I did change. And then I'll bring the AI back in, and then 2 weeks out, I'll just take it. I'll smash, not smash it, but I'll bring it down. And I'll reintroduce clenbuterol too, as needed. I have a tentative plan of what might need to happen, but again, what I do, there's always an assessment and then an application for needs. If I need it, I'll use it. If not, I don't need to. So.
Well, I think that was really productive, man. I think that kind of walks us through like Indy to Bahamas pretty well. I think people are just curious to see how it pans out, the differences in decision making as you work your way through it, and those kinds of things. So
I think I can still come like fuller and harder. Not harder, but fuller. Just as hard. I mean, I was still so hard in these past shows. I think fuller is just the thing.
That 1 pound difference you saw from Indy to New York, I think you have room for that again.
I think so. You almost could have pulled. I think people would argue, even Renee would probably argue, like you could have pulled the pound up there and still had the look. So maybe that's a 2 pounds in for the Bahamas. Yeah. We'll see how it looks. It's going to be messy there because Renee's competing in her pro debut, and then I also have 5 other people competing, 3 WPD pros and 2 NPC. But all good. I'll stay organized. Yeah. With how I try to peak people, it's just not as many variables to where I need such close monitoring. And I know that sounds like, oh, well, you're coaching them how you should be. It's like, well, no, like we've done so much work ahead of time that we have a fairly predictive plan,
So you have a predicted response. And
yeah.
So like,
right.
What the variables are going to do to what level. So you're not guessing and fixing anymore.
Yeah. And this show, like I had some options and I tossed them around with you, like what you thought too.
Yeah.
Because the goal here is like getting to Olympia, being my best at the Olympia. And can I do that if I continue competing? And I think I can. I think I can be my best at Olympia. So what sets the stage for that? Would it be jumping into a show in 6 weeks after New York, or was it waiting? What was that? What did I say? It was going to be 12 weeks to do the Texas Open, and then I would have 8 weeks till the Olympia. So I'd have like this 6-week break, then maybe 6 weeks to pull back down. Then I would have to go right into Olympia, which might be a 3-week break.
5 weeks.
And then 5 week of prep, which already going into this phase of like bringing you up and like coming down, it's a mind fuck, but also it's really hard to know where you're at. So I rather like have this phase on my qualifier than have more of this predictive assessment in that I can do going into Olympia and be fresher for Olympia. So that's still made the most sense to me.
100%.
Yeah.
We're excited, man. I think we're all excited to see it come to fruition and come together, and just it's intriguing because like I feel like the kind of process that you're running with yourself is the kind of process that should be ran throughout the coaching industry, and I think it's bringing a lot of light to that.
Yeah, it's really encouraging to the response I got back from these shows, like, and being transparent with sharing. And I think people gain a lot of value out of it to see what we're truly doing. And you're not giving away secrets, or I know guys will kind of like ghost prep, right? And they're like, well, I'm not going to post anything until you see me on stage. And it's like, what exactly did that do for you? It's not going to influence the judges once you're out there. If anything, like we're bodybuilding and we're a business, it's going to promote you and get attention on you. Like I got a ton of attention, like posting my transparency and my pics and stuff. I mean, some guys, I understand, like going to Olympia, I wasn't posting anything because I wasn't confident in my look. I was embarrassed. And so, I mean, that's my own thing. But as far as like, I'm ghost prepping, you're just going to see me like when I walk out, and then I'm going to, it doesn't matter. Like if anything, you're just going to build hype around your name if you're posting like some like awesome pics going in, or you're giving these people this information and value. It's like you need, bodybuilding, this is a business, and like to promote yourself, posting like information that can help people is what's going to draw more people and help you out. So,
yep.
And I'm glad to be able to be at a point where I'm, confident to coach myself, and I can do it in a way that's dispelling a lot of the myths and fallacies that are out there, and also getting away from hopefully exposing some of the abusive abusive is a little bit exaggerated term, but extreme approaches that are more risky for competitors that just don't know, cutting water, sodium, taking a bunch of diuretics, and then they miss the mark, right? It's like we have someone that's like nailing the mark, like harder than everyone else, doing less than everyone else. Not that everyone, but I'm not trying to toot my own horn. That's not me at all. I just truly want to help people and show people that there is a less risky way to do things and still have an even better outcome, and something that you're not going to get on stage and like totally miss and be disappointed.
Yeah, and objective too, right? Like it's in a sport that can be so subjective, we can take objective approaches in order to bring the best package that individual can bring.
Yeah, you need a way to to track this stuff, right? And look back and say like where for one in your plan, like where did it go wrong, but where did I look good too? And there's so much of just these terms thrown around, and then it's so confusing. Like people get off stage, and like Renee was asking me, she had some girls ask her how to tighten their, like, what does she do for glutes to get her lower glutes so detailed? Because they came off stage and the judge says, you need to tighten up your lower glute. And like, what the hell does that mean? Like, well, and then this girl puts in her mind, she doesn't know, right? Like, as educated or, just naive, like asking someone else, like, hey, how do I just tighten up the lower glute? It's like, how do you just drop body fat in that area? Or how do you develop just that area? Like, what do I need to do? Just asking, do you do cardio in a certain way? These questions that now you have someone like spouting out this misinformation and dogma that gets passed around. So terminology is confusing for these people. It's like, hey, you just had to get leaner overall. And I was like, sorry, that's not the sexy sale. Like, oh yeah, we need to do this one exercise where you like kick out to the side and like twist your pinky toe like 15 degrees. It's like, oh, cool, okay. But if you tell them like, no, you still lose body fat, they're like, oh, screw that, I'm gonna go ask someone else. But yeah, there's this the terms that people like, the subjective terms that we see around show day, like, hey, get fuller or get drier. Just like, oh man, my coach messed up. He didn't, dehydrate me enough. It's like, no, was it drier, or do you just need to lose body fat? So if we can actually had some ways that we're like measuring these things somewhat, like we have some caliper sites, we have visuals, and then we can look back at the plan that we've actually been documenting and say like, oh yeah, this is why you look like this on stage. And we had some other measures to kind of like confirm these things too. I think it makes a more scientific, meticulous approach that has people missing the mark less.
100% agree. I don't think I can add anything to that, to be honest.
Well, then on that, I guess we'll end this conversation.
Yep. Thanks for listening, guys. We love the feedback and just enjoy hearing that y'all are enjoying it. So let us know if there's anything specific y'all want to hear, but we'll have more episodes coming your way for sure too.
Thank you, everybody. J3U Podcast, over and out.